Hello everyone! So I've seen the preliminary comments for my recent video and it kind of feels like I've, kicked a bee's hive. But maybe I'll have some hate watchers and I figure this one will give you guys some good schadenfreude because as medic in this demo, I basically single-handedly lose my team the game and drop 5 Ubers, which is an egregiously high number of Ubers to drop. So I figure this would actually be an excellent example when talking about what is kind of a good or a bad use. Because sometimes it gets talked about where, either there are some drops that are understandable, right? If a bomber doesn't get called, for example, and has a good timing or something like that, you might drop to that if he sinks its rockets correctly. Or, yeah, just threats that aren't called. If no one calls a sniper and you're baiting the door correctly and then you walk through and get body shot, not your fault. Totally fine drop. However, there are some drops that are just bad, right? In some cases, you can see the damage coming in and you know that it's going to drop you, but you still don't use. And, part of that could just be panic. Part of that could just be maybe a little bit of like cope of, oh, I'll be fine here. But in other cases, just based on the situation, that very well could have been a 6th drop, actually. But in other cases, even based on the situation, without necessarily knowing what the threats are, you know that you're basically going to have to use. And it's very easy in those situations to drop Uber. So I kind of want to talk about when uses are good, when uses are bad. Because there are such things as bad uses. For example, if there's only... let's imagine there is... You wipe a team on mid, right? And there's only one soldier left. And that soldier tries to salvage bomb you as the medic. If you are 150 HP, then that guy can't kill you with one rocket. So you really shouldn't be using if you're at 150 HP. If all your players are alive as well, it's totally worth dropping a player in order to preserve that ad. So if you get bombed and you're full HP and you use a bad use there, even if you're scared, even if you're worried that he might direct you with his rocket or something like that, it's still the intelligent play to not use until at least you take some damage first, for example. Now, as far as bad drops go, a lot of it is going to be, as far as like reaction goes, I think one of the drops is coming up here, which will be an excellent example. So we already got the force. I don't know why I'm so forward while I'm so weak. 50 HP there. Very easy to die. Obviously, my team is trying to play kind of an Uber trade there, which honestly we would have had to get out afterwards pretty much, because we did lose a soldier for the force and we were already down a player, I think. So it really would have just been a use and then leave. But still, just not situationally aware and not playing my health correctly. Just kind of assuming that I'll be fine. So not a good drop there. What was I talking about when we got to that point? I do not recall precisely. We were talking about bad drops, right? And when it might be bad. So, right. So mechanically, obviously, more experienced medics are going to have better mechanics, meaning you are going to be better in those tough situations in which you need to decide whether you have to force to something or not. And that could be as simple as being more capable of reacting to a bomb, for instance, or reacting to rockets being fired from a soldier who might be like mid-range. So you kind of can trust your reaction time over whether you have to use or not. Based on whether that rocket comes out or not before that soldier dies, for example. So a stronger medic is going to be better in that respect. But there's, mechanics aside, there's a lot of game sense going into whether a drop is good or bad. Because you can kind of, as you play more medic, you get more experience. You can kind of understand those situations in which you are just going to have to use Uber. And a lot of the time as well, if you're just stuck in a horrible situation and no matter what, you're either going to force or drop, or at least it's high enough or it's likely enough that you're going to force or drop, then a lot of teams, well, medics will be calling like we have to use like look for an exchange or something, because obviously if you're guaranteed going to be getting forced, then at least a nice like salvaged outcome of that is the other team using as well, and you at least have some time with the Uber to reposition and set up for a good post, right? Yeah, that spy got revealed. I do drop here on last. And another thing as well, so for this last drop, part of it is we have just such a weird, sucky hold going on. We don't have an engineer because my guy is just, my flank scout's on sniper for whatever reason. And we have our demo on like the wrong door. So it's a tough situation. And yeah, you'll see if we get there that, again, not a great drop, a little more understandable than some of the ones later on. But still, it highlights a good example of, yes, you could get like the super skis milk off or something, but it also runs some risk because you need to really understand the situation. And if there is like a lot of pressure and potentially damage coming from a source that you aren't aware of, then a use is totally fine. Even if it turns out that's like not really the case, then still like that's a team problem. So here, yeah, you can see just not great. Part of the problem, again, they're able to get through that door, but still, like, what was I, 60, 20 HP in a position like that? Not great. And also they had a sniper here as well, so I just couldn't position like safely, it felt like, because our hold was so bad. But yet again, that should have been a force and not a drop, and that just would have been better. So another situation of, despite how horrible it was, maybe I was just put in a situation where I have to use Uber or I will drop, through no fault of my own. What is my fault is the fact that rather than a force, it was a drop. And it's very easy to understand a situation. Well, after the fact, it's easy to understand a situation like that. But with enough experience, you see that and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to have to use. And if my team doesn't like that I have to use here and they're upset that I'm getting forced, well, then they should have a better hold on last, or they should do things differently so that I'm not put into that position, right? Here, just caught on mid. Nothing really to be done about that. So yeah, trying to think if there's a way I can sort of categorize things, because it does seem almost case by case. We've already talked about, being able to actually adequately recognize when damage is coming in, and being able to react for it is like a pretty high level thing you can do on med in order to avoid having to use in those cases where you don't necessarily need to. But a lot of your Ubers, or a lot of your forces, and maybe even most of your forces, are going to be on some level of assumption of kind of deciding that, the risk is too high, essentially. The odds of a player being able to get another shot off is pretty high. Now, there are things you can do for sure. I mean, even if you're in a range where the rocket is not reactable, if you can count the number of rockets they have, which is a difficult thing to do, but if a soldier high bombs, then a lot of the time they're only going to have 2 rockets loaded. Sometimes they can like reload a rocket in the air and they'll have 3. But point being, if you can count those rockets, and that's fantastic. You know the guy doesn't have ammo and he has a really long time to reload that rocket. Plenty of time for you to wait before having to use when that rocket is reloaded. But even if that's not the case, you eat like a soldier just lands in your face, hits you with 1 rocket. You don't have to insta-pop necessarily. You can wait just a fraction of a second until that soldier is about to fire the second, because the rocket launcher is relatively slow firing, right? So there are things you can do to just prolong that and try to hold off a little bit. Because yet again, I haven't really even mentioned it, and it should be obvious, but milking an Uber, that it's better to milk when you wouldn't have died, and it's better to force when you would. Very simple. So everything that comes after is about judging basically which of those 2 situations that you're in. Because yeah, if you would have died anyway, then obviously then a force is just the better play. But if you would have survived, and also there's something to note as well about your teammates surviving, because if you if you like lose, it's actually a classic thing you'll see meds do sometimes, is the drop everyone and yourself, where you're losing like multiple players. It's a really bad situation. Oh, is this another? Oh man, I should have used way sooner there. Again, just trying to milk for no reason. Oh, that's the next thing I should talk about, is the kind of milking for no reason type of deal. Because I was begging for a drop there. So the situation is very easy. Like you could see the other team obviously so far forward that it is obviously going to be a trade. And I don't remember, even though I saw it like 5 seconds ago, if they had used first. I think they may have. But point being, if either team uses, the other is probably going to have to use pretty much instantly, because there's enough damage going out that players are weak enough that you just kind of want to save people, right? So in a situation like that, it really doesn't even matter that much how long you hold on to your Uber. The only thing that matters is that players are not getting dropped, especially the medic not getting dropped, but also that players are healthy as well. So using early in order to avoid like your scout taking 80 damage or something, so you don't have to just perma beam them, and you might only have to flash them for a little bit and then be able to heal someone else, and your scout's going to be okay when they're unflashed because they're still healthy. Stuff like that is going to be useful. But something I see a lot of the time is like the really bad drops is not necessarily in situations where it's like really, really easy to understand. Or excuse me. That is what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily in those situations in which it's so very easy to understand that you're going to have to use. Although that is a case of like really bad drops when, the medic is just completely alone against a soldier, and this soldier is not going to miss the rocket. And the med just, for some reason, ego milks because he thinks that the soldier's just going to randomly flick off of him or something. Those are definitely bad drops. But a common example I see at a low level of what I would call bad drops is, in some cases, situations in which dropping Uber is, I think I might, we'll see if I accidentally use here. I think I do. Well, I don't know. It's weird. Yeah, I do. Which is insane to me because I play demo and I don't think I've accidentally debt my stickies once, but okay, maybe my med is just bad. Okay, the point I was making though is at a low level, the quote-unquote bad uses that you see is oftentimes in situations in which it's not really that clear whether you should have been using or not. As in, it's not necessarily clear whether you're going to be taking enough damage to drop or not. But it's in situations in which it literally does not matter whether you use or not. As in, so let's talk about some examples. So, in an Uber exchange type of situation, let's imagine you are holding mid, and it's slight disad, but you're building really well, so you actually get Uber by the time they take positioning. So you might want to play for an exchange. You walk forward a bit, and your soldier ends up getting a force, right? And you, as a combo, are not committed enough that you just are guaranteed going to have to use. So you can kite pretty far back, right? And you might not have to use at all. In a case like that, not using is actually like good for you, right? Because you are able to preserve Uber advantage for the next point. And you can potentially even dry push the next point and then have enough Uber to push into the next point. Whether that be a pop through or a dry push is up to you. But point being, in a case like that, whether you use or not does actually have implications for the future. But let's imagine a case in which the other teams, let's imagine the exact same situation in which you are getting Uber as the other team is dry pushing through. You get, as they get through the door, and you have a soldier, but instead of getting the force this time, he gets a drop. And then the other team tries to sell out for you. In a case like this, it really does not matter that much at all whether you use or not. Yes, in like a literal sense, you have full ad rather than just like 30 or 40 ad if you don't use, but it really doesn't matter that much. In a case like that, their medic is already dead. If you just reaction pop your Uber when their med drops, which I don't think you should do, but if you were to do that, it's still a beneficial situation for you because you have that ad even though you used. So in a case like that, medics are theoretically much more forcible because you just don't lose as much from using an Uber there as you would in other situations, right? I think another drop might be coming up here. So already down 2 players. We really should just be looking for an exchange or looking for an out or something. And things are messy. There's players pressuring all sorts of doors. I'm trying to keep people healthy. There's just random things on my screen. I don't actually know if this is the force. I do drop on 2 here at some point. I don't know. But yeah, in certain situations, the Uber just really... it doesn't hurt you that much to use at all. I actually don't drop here. I do drop on second at one point, and it's not a good one. And it's, in my opinion, like a textbook case of just situational knowing that you have to use. Because I don't even see a single enemy, I don't think. All I know is my own positioning and my health, and that is honestly enough to tell me, yes, I'm going to have to use. So anyway, again, here, I just get to milk. I'm at full HP, I see all the threats, I know I don't have to necessarily... I know the amount of potential damage coming in, so I know that I don't have to use, right? So a case like that, that's it, yeah. The second that I just sink a bunch of damage, 13 HP, just pop by reaction. Very easy to understand. I don't need to, like, think, okay, but what if, like, what if I get to milk here? What if that was all? No, just use. Very, very easy situation. Even if none of that damage came in, and in retrospect, I could have been able to milk it, not a single player would look at their med, get hit down to 13 HP, and use as a bad use. That is always, always going to be justified. So again, even though, and actually watching that back, a lot of that damage came in pretty quickly. So that did require some reaction time on my end. But point being, still, would have been a totally worthwhile use. And it was a drop instead, which is much costlier. Somehow my team doesn't lose the round instantly because of it, though, so that's nice. Anything else I want to talk about? I do kind of want to just ramble on for a bit because, of course, there's a lot of drops in this demo, and they all serve as different examples of dropping Uber, and a lot of them are very avoidable drops as well, importantly. Okay, so what else is there to talk about? Well, we've already talked about how in certain situations uses are just totally fine. Another case is there are good times to Uber and bad times to Uber. Especially, for example, when it comes to a push. This is unfortunate splitting there, but we're okay. What do I mean by this? Well, I think a good example is when you're trying to push into last with ad. So if you are playing to pop through, for example, then that's very easy to understand. You just use get through the door, and you're good. Now, in another example, you might want to dry push into last, or try and take some space without using Uber first. And that is also a viable way to approach it. There are certain threats and different considerations as to which you might want to do, but those are your two general options. However, what you see sometimes, and I think a good example of this is actually Gully Wash last, when teams try to push through Shutter, sometimes they like clear lockers first, or don't use through lockers, but use through Shutter. And to me, this is pointless and risky, because you don't really you save what, like a quarter of a second of the Uber to like saved getting through lockers, which a lot of the time is not worth. And also a lot of the time scouts will actually like clear the stickies and like slow the Uber, or slow the push rather, which also counteracts that kind of time save in the Uber, I suppose. But you're not saving enough time for it to really be worth it. And all you're really doing is risking losing a player if that door is trapped. So if we apply this to last, for example, top left on Snakewater, the map we're playing now, if you use through the door, then sure, it's totally fine. You get to flash everyone through. You don't have to care about traps at all. If you want to milk through the door, that's also fine, because you actually get to take meaningful space before using your Uber, which is helpful, right? However, if you get through the door just barely and then use, then you're not getting any meaningful space. You're not getting a meaningfully longer Uber. All you're doing is just risking losing players to the traps on the door. So on the two ends of things, whether getting through completely freely or just popping before you even get through the door and flashing everyone through, those are the two like really good cases. But the middle ground is actually bad. So the point I'm making here is that there are some Ubers that the timing is like just not worth taking or just bad, and then there are others that are good. So you saw here in exchange. Yeah, I understand exactly what's happening here. It's a good use, even though theoretically in the back of your mind you could be like, oh, I could drop my demo here, hold on to the... No, they are flashing players through the doors. No matter what, you're going to have to use. If you drop your demo, you're going to have to use. You can drop the entire world and you're going to have to use. So just use and save those players. The post turned out very poorly, but in my opinion, the exchange went quite well because they dropped a scout during it. We didn't lose anyone, at least not in the exchange. I wasn't paying attention to what happened outside the exchange, but still. Good example of just an Uber that makes sense to use. I'm not in any risk of dying, but still, it should be used, and I'm able to recognize that and actually do it right. Okay, anything else? Anything else? I'm trying to think now, because, again, there are just some of those cases where the common mistake I see among newer medics from drops are just those where it's not necessarily... Well, there are a fair amount of drops that are just mechanical failures. Medics just not looking up, for example, at bombs, or just getting... like 2-rocketed or something, which better surfs and better mechanics overall, it's absolutely going to help with. But a lot of it is kind of game sense and trying to milk Uber when you really don't need to. Because again, it is that kind of risk-reward assessment where certain Ubers are going to be, or certain like ads in certain game states are just going to be inherently more useful or less useful than others. So you absolutely want to factor that in. Again, that case of if their med already died on mid, then yeah, it's a lot easier to justify a force because it really doesn't hurt your team so much. Again, case here, full HP, so I know I don't have to use to at least the first rocket. So I did lose sight of that soldier, which is absolutely bad, but I end up knowing, like just by looking at my health, I at least know that I won't have to drop if I don't use until I'm weak enough, right? Unless there's some random lock pipe that I get hit by or stuff like that. And then there, get hit with the arrow. I think my team was already calling for the Uber, actually, so it didn't really matter that much. Yeah, there are a couple more drops, I think, but I don't know if I have enough to talk about to get there. But point being, if I were to summarize what makes a good use versus a bad use, for starters, how important the Uber is to begin with, and finding that line between whether you, because a lot of it is hindsight, right? Knowing, oh, never mind. Reminded me of a different situation. Although that soldier being so forward is actually foreshadowing. I don't think we're going to get to it, but one of my drops is my team calling for me to take very slim ad into last very quickly. I was I think I was like 20 HP from the fight on second, and that guy just wasn't called fast enough by the time I'm getting through the door, and just a random spam rocket around the corner just clipped me, and I ended up dying. An example of it not necessarily being my fault, but definitely still avoidable in the sense that, well, actually, I don't know. Because on some sense, as medic, you are a bit of like a counter call class, where your health or the health of your team, which is something that you are very innately aware of, because it's kind of your whole job to understand and heal people. But your understanding of your team's health and whatnot helps a lot as far as being able to counter call plans. Like if your pocket scout is healthy and thinks that everyone else is healthy and really like sees an opportunity to maybe take some space on a really slim timing window, but everyone's weak, you as the medic can absolutely call that off and be like, no, we have to heal up first. And likewise, like if you're so weak that you're so scared of like going very fast, then yeah, it can be worth countercalling. Here you can see I actually use first. I very well could have milked that Uber. I very well could have been like, oh, well, we can get them to use first. It's totally fine. We get the longer Uber. In a situation like that, it literally does not matter because it actually worked out quite well for us. Just looking at the screen and what happened in that exchange, you saw so many players so far forward that you by default know that they're just going to be forcing a lot of flashes, if not dropping players outright in that Uber. So it's totally fine to use first, and arguably even preferable to use first because you're keeping your players healthy. You're using before all that damage comes in. So again, another example of, in a case like that where you know that they're going to have to use anyway, pretty much immediately, it really, really does not matter whether you milk or not, because... And in some cases, it's actually good to avoid milking too much because you kind of want to Uber past a lot of the incoming damage. You don't want to just go by like a razor's edge to where everyone is so weak that if you miss a flash, they just instantly die or something like that. Like what happens here, for example. That medic trying to time so well the milk so that... Oh, this is the case, yeah. So 30 HP. My team really wants to go fast into last, which we just don't have to do, to be clear. Those picks are pretty fresh. I probably should have countercalled here. I thought it was slim ad. It was not at all. I think I may have wanted to... well, I could just bait the door more, I guess. I'm not trying to make this like a demo review or something. But again, tough situation. It's one of those drops that's theoretically avoidable with just a better setup, better baiting, stuff like that. But it's easy in the moment to get like caught up or whatever. Anyway, what was the point I was making before that came up? Yeah, sometimes avoiding that incoming damage is important, and it's better in an exchange to have everyone be healthy for the post rather than everyone just barely hanging on where you kind of just have to leave off your horrible health in and of itself. Yeah. So, man, I really don't think I ever nailed down like a very clear sort of... not format, not, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. A little scatterbrained right now. But anyway, yeah, to one last time summarize, certain Ubers are just inherently more valuable than others. Whether or not you can milk or force is largely a matter of understand. Horrible drop. That's the last one. Absolutely terrible. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I just locked up or something. But it's a case where no matter what, I'm going to have to use or I will die. It is all but guaranteed, so I just should use. I don't know if I was waiting to see if I could react to the rocket or not, but that's an issue. And that's actually the end of the half. So that drop lost the game in a very direct way. But yeah, like getting too caught up in trying to avoid drops mechanically by being able to react or whatnot. And maybe there's like ego at play of, oh, I'll be fine here. I've had like good milks earlier or in the half, which in this case wasn't particularly true. Stuff like that. It's very easy to just miss those situations where, again, it's just game sense of, yeah, this is obviously a situation which you have to use. So yeah. Finally, we got through it all. Finally, to summarize, to reiterate for like a third or a fourth time now, certain Ubers are just better than others, and that is something that you'll have to sort of factor in when it even matters whether you use or not, because sometimes it really hardly matters or matters very little. And in other cases, yeah, there's a game sense element of, oh, my game crashed. Oh, man. Well, there's a game sense element of just understanding those situations in which you just kind of are going to have to use and then finding a good opportunity to do so. And then there is a mechanics element of, in some cases, you are able to react to the damage. In some cases, you are able to very clearly understand that situation and know that, you know, here with this certain health amount, with these threats on my screen, I don't have to use yet. I'm totally fine. And then here, okay, now I'm at risk. Okay, it's just one soldier. He just shot the rocket. I can wait a little bit. Okay, now I have to use stuff like that. But yeah, it's all about weighing the positives and the negatives and the risk reward assessment. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that completely horrible medic half out of me. Yeah, I'll see you all next time.